In the spring of 1945, as the Reich's defenses buckled and American forces poured into central Germany, the shattered city of Kassel found itself transformed into an unplanned fortress. Not a medieval castle at all, but an industrial center dominated by the sprawling Henschel works, where some of the final King Tiger tanks were assembled. When elements of General George S. Patton's Third Army closed in during early April, they expected only token resistance. Instead, they encountered a ragged pocket of heavy armor crews, mechanics, trainees, and remnants of panzer units determined to fight amid bombed-out factories, twisted rails, and ruined streets. What unfolded was neither grand strategy nor textbook battle, but a brutal, brief clash. Infantry and armor of the U.S. Army pressing into an industrial ruin against a handful of Tiger II heavy tanks never intended to fight apart from a full division, now stranded on empty fuel drums, spare tracks, and fading hope. This is the full story of how the last King Tigers at Kassel fought and died against Patton's veterans in a largely forgotten confrontation. Kassel lies some 140 kilometers northeast of Frankfurt in the state of Hesse. Before the war, it sheltered 200,000 souls. By spring 1945, it had become one of Germany's most pockmarked cities. The RAF's incendiary raid of October 22, 1943, saw 569 bombers, mostly Lancasters, unleash high explosives and firebombs to spark a raging firestorm. Temperatures soared above 1,000 degrees, streets became ovens, basements suffocated their inhabitants, and 10,000 civilians perished in under 2 hours. Medieval towers, centuries-old timber-framed houses, vanished in the blaze. Subsequent raids carved deeper scars. The rail yards, the bridges, the Henschel plant itself were blasted again and again. By March 1945, Kassel could have passed for Stalingrad. Skeletal walls lined with bodies under broken beams, water rationed from wells, electricity a flickering hope. Yet the Henschel factory somehow kept its lines running. Underground tunnels replaced shattered halls. Teams of workers patched bomb damage and rolled out Tiger IIs day and night. Every new tank might be the last, because by late March, literally 8 fresh King Tigers rumbled from the gates, painted in factory, grey, and handed over to raw crews of the 3rd Company, 511th Heavy Tank Battalion. Most of these boys were 17, 18 years old, with only days of training on the mighty 69-ton behemoths. They knew the basics, starting the Maybach engine, shifting gears, loading the 88mm gun, but had never fired a round in anger. No gunnery practice, no maneuver exercises, no combined arms drills. They were thrust straight into battle against Patton's hardened veterans. General Patton had smashed across the Rhine on March 22nd at Oppenheim, his pontoon bridges carrying entire divisions into the heart of Germany. Ordered by Bradley to swing east and protect the Allied flank, Patton's Third Army thundered forward. By March 26th, his lead units reached Frankfurt, encountering nothing more formidable than hastily cobbled-together rifle companies and machine gun teams. His former instructor at cavalry school, Lieutenant General Troy Middleton, led 8 Corps northward toward Kassel, assigning the veteran 80th Infantry Division the task of seizing the ruined city. Intelligence estimated maybe 2,000 or 3,000 defenders, mostly second-line troops, a guess that would prove far too low but still conformed to standard Allied doctrine. Invest, bombard, break through, move on. In Berlin, Hitler had already decreed Kassel a Festung, a fortress to be held at all costs. Command fell to Major General Johannes Urquhart, a 51-year-old communications officer with no combat experience. His staff was a patchwork of trainers, signalmen, depot clerks, and instructors. None had formed a defense under fire. Phone lines lay severed. Radios barely functioned. Messengers on bicycles crawled down alleys carrying orders that arrived hours late or not at all. A motley force of training battalion instructors and trainees, men who taught armor tactics but never practiced them, and teenage grenadiers with Panzerfausts but no practice, flak batteries reconfigured for ground fire, Volkssturm militiamen, over 45, in civilian coats and armbands, all stood facing Patton's juggernaut. On March 30th, 8 King Tigers rolled south from Kassel toward Fritzlar, nearly 30 kilometers away, tasked with blocking the American push along secondary roads shattered by bombs. The tanks crawled at 20 kilometers per hour, each crew barely familiar with its control linkages. No infantry rode with them. A planned armored grenadier company never materialized. As they waited in hull-down positions on a ridgeline overlooking the highway, Combat Command A of the U.S. 4th Armored Division advanced in light tanks and armored cars, veterans from Normandy, the Bulge, the Rhine crossing, surely expecting only feeble opposition. Then the Germans struck. At roughly 1,000 meters, the Tiger II's 88mm guns roared. One salvo vaporized 3 Stuart light tanks and an armored car. American crews bailed out or burned inside. Tank destroyers, M10s and M36, moved up but found their rounds bouncing off thick, sloped glacis plates. Counterfire killed 2 M10s and an M36 before Shermans could wheel off and summon artillery. Within half an hour, 105 Metres howitzers were shelling the ridgeline. The Germans ghosted back, the Tigers creeping off reverse through farm tracks. One battered tank through a track. Its crew wired demolition charges, semi-destroyed the hull, and piled into the survivors' vehicles. By nightfall, 7 King Tigers lurched back into Kassel, spent of fuel, low on ammunition, shaken but intact. The Americans lost some half-dozen armored vehicles, but pressed on without hesitation. By April 1st, the 80th Infantry Division pressed into Kassel's southern and southwestern approaches. 3 regiments, 317th, 318th, and 319th, each backed by Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, and a rolling curtain of artillery, inched forward behind combat engineers, clearing rubble. The Germans struck first from an 88mm flak battery sighted on high ground. 3 Shermans flame-tested at over a kilometer out. Within minutes, though, U.S. counter-battery fire silenced 4 of the 6 guns and scattered the rest. Meanwhile, Urkaben had moved the Tigers into hulled-down positions among industrial ruins south of the Fuhler River. But again, with no infantry to shield them, and with ammunition dwindling. On April the 2nd, a desperate German counterattack was ordered. A hastily gathered battalion, largely untried grenadiers, rode half-tracks ahead of 7 Tiger IIs and a handful of Panzer IVs toward the American lines. Spotters alerted U.S. artillery. Within minutes, the flimsy half-tracks were shredded. Infantry dismounted under salvo after salvo of screaming shell fire. Behind them, the Tigers encountered blasted streets, blind corners, and American tank destroyers cosseted in overwatch positions. Communications collapsed. Crews became disoriented in the labyrinth of ruins. One Tiger reached the Fuhler Bridge and knocked out 2 tank destroyers before a flanking volley set its engine ablaze. The commander was cut down in his hatch, and as flames spread, the remaining crew bailed into open ground, only to be captured or killed. 3 more Tigers were wrecked before the counterattack sputtered to nothing. By April 3rd, only 4 King Tigers remained. Urquhart ordered them eastward to defend the exits from Castle to buy time for his scattered infantry. Sergeant Hannes Wilms chose a spot by the Eastern Highway, behind rubble from a demolished factory. At midday, he destroyed 2 Shermans approaching along the open road, then braced for counter-battery. American gunners lobbed smoke and high explosives, but Wilms's 150mm thick turret front held. That night, a local civilian guide led an infantry platoon behind Wilms's blind side. At dusk, 2 bazooka teams scored direct hits on the engine deck. Flames erupted. Wilms himself was shot as he attempted to escape. The loader and gunner emerged to surrender. The remaining 2 men were trapped and burned by cooking off ammunition. With that, the last German armor flexing any threat to Americans disappeared. On April 4th, Castle's fate was sealed. U.S. infantry advanced through the shell-choked streets from north, west, and south, supported by Shermans, tank destroyers, 105 and 155mm howitzers, and relentless M16 multiple-gun half-tracks. Block by block, the defenders were annihilated or surrendered. By mid-morning, Urquhart's command bunker, a reinforced concrete air raid shelter, was surrounded. Recognizing the futility, he ordered the white flag and came out with 20 officers. At noon on April 4th, 325 soldiers laid down arms. Others had died in the rubble or slipped away into the countryside. German strength at the outset had hovered around 4,000 to 5,000. But in the end, only a fraction remained to be counted. The rest killed, captured, or scattered. Casualties on the American side were light: 23 killed, 114 wounded, and half a dozen missing in the 80th Division's costly 5-day operation. Patton barely paused to appreciate the hulks of King Tigers left rusting in Castle's streets. For him, momentum was everything. Prisoners were processed, roads cleared, and Third Army roared east toward Eisenach and beyond. Castle faded into another dot on the map, another testament that even Germany's heaviest steel could not stem the tide of Patton's advance in those final weeks. If you'd like more stories like these, please like and subscribe.